You know that feeling when someone's words cut so deep they leave permanent scars? When the person who's supposed to lift you up instead tears you down piece by piece until you don't even recognize yourself anymore? That was my life for 8 years with Benjamin. 8 years of being told I wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't enough, period. But sometimes, when you're pushed to your absolute breaking point, you discover just how ambitious you really are. Let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about rediscovering who you are when everyone else has forgotten. I met Benjamin in college. Back then, I was this bright-eyed business major with dreams bigger than the sky. I had plans to work in corporate strategy, maybe start my own consulting firm someday. I was the girl who stayed up all night working on case studies, who networked like crazy, who genuinely believed I could change the world. Benjamin was studying finance, and he was charming in that confident way that made you feel like you were the only person in the room when he talked to you. We fell in love hard and fast. Senior year, while I was applying for entry-level positions at major corporations, he kept talking about our future together. He'd say, pulling me close, "Why stress about climbing some corporate ladder when we could build something beautiful together? I'll make enough money for both of us. You could focus on the things that really matter, like starting a family." It sounded romantic at the time. Here was this man who loved me enough to want to take care of me completely. My friends thought I was crazy to turn down those job offers, but Benjamin made it sound like the most natural thing in the world. "Trust me," he'd whisper, "I've got this, I've got us." So I trusted him. After graduation, while he started his career at an associates, this prestigious consulting firm, I stayed home and started planning our wedding. We got married a year later, and I threw myself into being the perfect wife. I cooked elaborate meals, kept our apartment spotless, organized his business events. I even started a little side business doing wedding planning, thinking I was being entrepreneurial. But Benjamin didn't see it that way. "Playing with flowers isn't a real business," he'd say whenever I'd excitedly tell him about a new client. "It's just a hobby." When Christian was born 2 years later, I was over the moon. Finally, I thought, this is what I was meant to do. Benjamin had been promoted twice by then, and he was bringing home good money. "See," he'd say, bouncing our son on his knee, "I told you I'd take care of everything, you just focus on being a mom." And I did. I threw myself into motherhood with the same intensity I'd once reserved for my career dreams. I read every parenting book, joined every mom group, made sure Christian had the best of everything. I convinced myself I was living my purpose. But something started shifting in Benjamin around year 3 of our marriage. The sweet words turned sharper. The romantic gestures became fewer and farther between. Instead of coming home excited to see us, he'd walk through the door with this look of mild annoyance, like we were interrupting something more important. "What did you do today?" he'd ask, and when I'd tell him about Christian's milestones or the I'd organized or the client consultation I'd had for my wedding business, he'd just nod absently and say, "That's nice." The criticism started small. "The house is kind of messy," he'd comment, even though I'd spent the entire day cleaning while chasing a toddler. "Did you really need to spend that much at the grocery store when I'd bought organic food for our family? Maybe you should think about doing something more substantial with your time." I started second-guessing everything. Was I being lazy? Was I not contributing enough? I worked harder, cleaned more, tried to make my wedding planning business more profitable, but nothing seemed to satisfy him. The real poison started when Christian turned 4. Benjamin had been promoted to senior associate, and suddenly he was this corporate success story. He'd come home talking about his colleagues, his projects, his achievements, and then he'd look at me, sitting there in my yoga pants with under my fingernails, and I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "You know," he said one evening while I was cleaning up after dinner, "I sometimes wonder what happened to the woman I married. She had ambition, she had drive, she had goals." I stopped scrubbing the pan I was holding. "What do you mean?" "I mean, look at you, you just sit at home all day, you're not fulfilling your potential, you have no ambition anymore." Each word was like a slap. "I'm raising our son, Benjamin, I'm building a business, You're playing house," he interrupted. "You're playing at being an entrepreneur, but you're not actually doing anything meaningful." I stood there, soapy water dripping from my hands, and felt something crack inside my chest. This was the man who had convinced me to give up my career dreams, who had promised to take care of us, who had made me feel like choosing family over career was not just okay, but noble. And now he was using that choice as a weapon against me. It only got worse from there. Every day brought new little cuts. "You just sit at home like a brood hen," he'd say when I'd ask him about his day. "Must be nice to have such an easy life," when I'd complain about being tired. "Maybe if you actually challenged yourself, you'd understand the pressure I'm under." The worst part wasn't even the words, it was the way he'd say them. With this casual cruelty, like he was stating obvious facts, like my entire existence was just this burden he had to carry. I started believing him. I started looking in the mirror and seeing what he saw, a woman who had given up, who had settled, who was just taking up space. I felt invisible in my own life, like I was slowly disappearing. But the human spirit is a funny thing. You can only push someone so far before they start pushing back. And my breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October when Christian was starting his second year of elementary school. I was having coffee with my neighbor Sarah, and she was telling me about her new job at a tech startup. You know, she said, you should really think about getting back into the workforce. You're so smart and you have all this business knowledge from your wedding planning. Companies are always looking for people with your skills. For the first time in years, I felt a tiny spark of the old me. You think so? I know so. In fact, my husband mentioned that his company is hiring for a strategic development position. It's at an Associates, isn't that where Benjamin works? And Associates, Benjamin's company, the place where he'd built his entire identity, where he was climbing the ladder to success. The thought of working there felt both thrilling and terrifying. That night, I brought it up to Benjamin. I've been thinking about going back to work, I said carefully. Now that Christian's in school, I have more time and I think I'm ready to. Work? Benjamin looked up from his laptop with this condescending smile. Sweetheart, you've been out of the game for 8 years. You have no idea how competitive it is out there. Besides, we don't need the money. It's not about the money, I said, feeling my cheeks flush. It's about me, about feeling useful again, about having a purpose beyond just. Beyond just what? Being a wife and mother? I thought you were happy with that. I am, but I want more. I want to feel like myself again. He closed his laptop and looked at me with that expression I'd come to hate, like he was talking to a child who didn't understand how the world worked. You can't just jump back into corporate life after 8 years. You're not qualified anymore. You don't have the skills, the connections, the drive. You're just not ambitious enough for that world. There it was again, not ambitious enough. The phrase that had become his favorite way to dismiss me, to make me feel small, to remind me of everything I'd supposedly given up. But this time, instead of shrinking, I felt something else. Anger, pure, clean anger that cut through years of self-doubt like a knife. You're right, I said quietly, I'm not ambitious enough. Benjamin smiled, thinking he'd won. I'm glad you understand. Maybe you could volunteer at Christian's school or something, find a nice hobby. I nodded and smiled back, but inside I was planning. The next morning, after Benjamin left for work and Christian was at school, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my laptop and started researching an Associates. I studied their website, their client list, their recent projects. I looked up the strategic development position Sarah had mentioned, and my heart started pounding. This wasn't just any job. This was exactly the kind of work I'd dreamed of doing in college. Strategic planning, business development, market analysis, all the things I'd studied, all the skills I'd developed in my wedding business but had never been given credit for. I spent the entire day researching. I looked up everyone in the strategic development department, studied their backgrounds, their career paths. I researched the company's competitors, their market position, their recent challenges. I hadn't felt this energized in years. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. The strategic development position wasn't just any opening. It was the exact position Benjamin had been working toward for years. He'd mentioned it dozens of times, how he was positioning himself to be the next head of strategic development, how it was his dream job, how it would finally put him in the big leagues. And they were hearing externally. I should have felt guilty, I should have talked to Benjamin about it, but all I could think about was his voice saying, "You're not ambitious enough." I updated my resume that night after everyone was asleep. I dug out my old portfolio from college, my business school projects, my case studies. I compiled 8 years of wedding planning experience and reframed it as project management, client relations, budget oversight, and strategic planning, because that's what it was, really. I just never called it that before. I wrote a cover letter that was part business proposal, part love letter to the company. I researched the hiring manager, found out she'd gone to the same business school I had just a few years earlier. I found connections we had in common, mutual professors, shared experiences. I submitted my application at 2 a.m. and then I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Benjamin's face when I told him I wasn't ambitious enough. I kept thinking about all the times he'd made me feel small, insignificant, like I was just taking up space in his successful life. The call came 3 days later. "Ms., this is Jennifer from an Associates. We'd like to invite you in for an interview." I had 2 weeks to prepare, 2 weeks to become the woman I'd been before Benjamin convinced me I wasn't enough. I bought a suit, my first business attire in 8 years. I practiced my elevator pitch until I could say it in my sleep. I researched every single person I might meet, every possible question they might ask. I told Benjamin I was going shopping. I told Christian I was having lunch with Sarah. I told myself I was just exploring options. But deep down, I knew this was war. The interview was at an Associates downtown office in a conference room on the 15th floor. I arrived 30 minutes early and sat in the lobby watching Benjamin's colleagues come and go. I recognized some of them from company parties, but none of them recognized me. I was invisible, just another candidate in a sea of suits. The interview lasted 3 hours. They brought in 5 different people: the hearing manager, the department head, 2 senior associates, and the CEO. Each conversation flowed seamlessly into the next. I presented my analysis of their current market position, my ideas for expansion, my vision for the strategic development department. "Your approach is remarkably comprehensive," the CEO said at the end. "You clearly understand our business in a way that most external candidates don't." "I've been studying an associates for a long time," I said, which was true even if they didn't know I'd been doing it from the inside. "We'll be in touch," Jennifer said, shaking my hand. But I have to say, this was one of the most impressive interviews I've conducted in years. I floated out of that building like I was walking on air. For the first time in 8 years, I felt like myself again. Not Benjamin's wife, not Christian's mother, but the woman who had dreams, who had skills, who had ambition. The waiting was torture. Every time my phone rang, my heart would race. Benjamin started commenting on how jumpy I was, how distracted I seemed. "Are you okay?" he'd ask, with just enough concern to sound caring but not enough to actually care. "I'm fine," I'd say, "just tired." A week later, Jennifer called. "I have good news. We'd like to offer you the position of Head of Strategic Development at an Associates." I had to sit down. Head of Strategic Development. Not just the position I'd applied for, but the exact job Benjamin had been dreaming of for years. The job he'd been positioning himself for, networking for, working toward. "The salary is $180,000 annually," Jennifer continued, "with performance bonuses and full benefits. We'd like you to start in 2 weeks if that works for you." $180,000. More than Benjamin made, more than I'd ever imagined making, more than enough to support myself and Christian if I needed to. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I accept." After I hung up, I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot and cried. Not sad tears, but something else. Relief, maybe, or disbelief, or the overwhelming sensation of coming back to life after years of barely existing. I had 2 weeks to figure out how to tell Benjamin, 2 weeks to prepare for what was about to happen, because I knew deep in my bones that this was going to change everything. I decided to wait until my first day to tell him. I know that sounds cruel, but I needed time to process what had happened. I needed to understand my own motivations, my own feelings. Was this revenge? Was this justice? Was this just me finally standing up for myself? Maybe it was all three. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I went through the motions of my normal routine: making breakfast, dropping Christian at school, running errands, picking him up, making dinner. But inside, I was buzzing with energy, with possibility, with something I'd almost forgotten existed. I spent my days researching the company more, preparing for my new role. I read every report an associates had published in the last 5 years. I studied their client base, their growth trajectory, their competitive advantages. I was more prepared for this job than I'd ever been for anything in my life. Benjamin noticed my mood change. "You seem different lately," he said one evening while we were watching TV. "Happier." "Do I asked, not looking away from the screen. "Yeah, it's nice. You seem more, I don't know, more like yourself." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to become more myself than I'd been in years, and he had no idea what was coming. My first day at an Associates was a Monday. I woke up at 5 a.m. before anyone else in the house was awake. I put on my new suit, did my hair and makeup with more care than I'd taken in years. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I'd almost forgotten, the woman who had ambition, who had dreams, who had the audacity to believe she could succeed. I made coffee for Benjamin like I did every morning. I packed Christian's lunch like I did every day. I kissed them both goodbye like it was just another normal Monday. "See you tonight," Benjamin said, barely looking up from his phone. "Actually," I said, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it, "I have something to tell you when you get home." He looked up then, mildly curious. "Oh, what's that?" "I'll tell you tonight. Have a good day at work." I drove to an Associates with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I parked in the garage, rode the elevator to the 15th floor, and walked through the glass doors into my new life. Jennifer met me at reception. "Welcome to the team. Are you ready for the tour?" She walked me through the office, introducing me to colleagues, showing me my new workspace. It was a corner office with windows overlooking the city, bigger than any space I'd ever had to myself. My nameplate was already on the door: Head of Strategic Development. "We'll have the all-hands meeting at 10 a.m., Jennifer said. "That's when we'll officially announce your hire to the whole company." The all-hands meeting. where Benjamin would be sitting, probably scrolling through his phone, half listening to corporate announcements, where he would hear my name called out as the new head of the department he'd been dreaming of joining. At 9:55, I walked into the large conference room where the entire company was gathering. I saw Benjamin immediately. He was sitting in the third row, talking to a colleague looking bored. He didn't notice me come in. "Good morning, everyone," the CEO said, standing at the front of the room. "I have some exciting news to share. As you know, we've been searching for a new head of strategic development, and I'm thrilled to announce that we've found the perfect candidate." I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else, like I was floating above the room, observing this surreal moment. "Please join me in welcoming to the and Associates family." The room erupted in polite applause. I stood up and waved, trying to look professional and confident, but my eyes were on Benjamin, watching his face as he processed what was happening. First, confusion. He looked around the room, trying to figure out where the name was coming from, then recognition as he saw me standing there, then shock, his mouth literally falling open, then something else, something that looked like panic. After the meeting, I made my way through the crowd of new colleagues offering congratulations. Benjamin intercepted me near the elevator. He said, his voice tight, "What the hell is going on?" "I got a job," I said simply. "I told you I was thinking about going back to work." "You told me you were thinking about volunteering at Christian school. You didn't tell me you were applying for jobs at my company." "You told me I wasn't ambitious enough for corporate life," I said, keeping my voice level. "I guess I wanted to prove you wrong." "This is insane. You can't just waltz in here and take." He stopped himself, but I knew what he was going to say. "Take his job, take his dream, take his future." "Take what, Benjamin?" "Nothing. We'll talk about this at home." But I wasn't done. "Actually, there's something else you should know. I'll be conducting a comprehensive review of all current strategic development projects, including the recent hearing decisions and project assignments." His face went pale. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'll be evaluating the effectiveness of all strategic initiatives, including personnel decisions. It's part of my job description." I walked away, leaving him standing there in the hallway, and I felt more powerful than I had in years. The rest of my first day was a whirlwind of meetings, introductions, and briefings. I learned about ongoing projects, reviewed budget allocations, met with key clients. It was everything I dreamed of and more: challenging, engaging, meaningful work that required every skill I'd developed over the years. But I also learned something else, something that made my blood run cold. During my briefing with the previous interim head, I was reviewing recent hearing decisions when I saw a familiar name. She'd been hired 6 months ago as a strategic development associate, despite having limited experience and mediocre qualifications. "Tell me about," I said casually. "How has she been performing?" The interim head looked uncomfortable. "Well, she's been struggling, to be honest. Her work quality has been inconsistent and she's missed several important deadlines, but Benjamin vouched for her quite strongly during the hearing process." My heart stopped. "Benjamin, he's not in strategic development." "No, but he's well respected here and he specifically recommended her for the position, said she had exceptional potential." I felt the world tilt around me. Benjamin had helped get someone hired, someone who wasn't qualified, someone who was struggling, someone whose last name was. After work, I called my old college friend, who also worked at an associates in the HR department. We'd kept in touch over the years, though we rarely saw each other. "I need to ask you something confidential," I said. "In strategic development, what do you know about her?" There was a long pause. "Where is this coming from?" "I'm her new boss. I'm just trying to understand the situation." Another pause. "Can we meet for coffee? This isn't a conversation for the phone." We met at a downtown, looked nervous, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "I don't know how to say this, but there are rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "About her and Benjamin. People have seen them together, at hotels, at restaurants across town, the kind of places you go when you don't want to be seen." The coffee cup slipped from my hand, hitting the table with a crash. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying Benjamin helped get his mistress hired at our company, and from what I hear, she's not exactly earning her position through her professional skills." I sat there in stunned silence, watching coffee spread across the table. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of being told I wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't contributing enough, wasn't enough. And meanwhile, he was having an affair with a woman he'd gotten hired through nepotism and favoritism. "How long?" I asked quietly. "The rumors started about a year ago, but you didn't hear this from me, and I could be wrong, it's just talk." But I knew she wasn't wrong. I knew it in my bones, in my heart, in the way Benjamin had been looking at me for the past year, like I was a burden, an obstacle, something to be managed rather than loved. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Everything made sense now. The late nights at work, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the way he'd started criticizing everything about me, my appearance, my ambition, my worth. He'd been building a case against me, convincing himself that I was the problem so he could justify what he was doing. When I got home, Benjamin was waiting for me in the kitchen. Christian was at after-school care, so we were alone. "We need to talk," he said. "Yes, we do. This job thing, it's not going to work. You can't just show up at my company and expect." Expect what? To be treated with respect? To be given a chance to succeed? To be judged on my merits rather than dismissed because of who I'm married to? This isn't about merit. You don't understand the politics, the relationships, The relationships, I laughed, and it sounded bitter even to my own ears. "Tell me about relationships, Benjamin, tell me about." The color drained from his face. "What about her? Tell me about how you helped her get hired. Tell me about the hotels, the restaurants, the meetings that have nothing to do with work." He stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish. "I don't know what you've heard, but..." "I've heard enough. 8 years, Benjamin. 8 years of you telling me I wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't contributing enough, wasn't enough. And meanwhile, you were having an affair with a woman whose only qualification for her job was sleeping with you. It's not what you think. What I think is that you're a hypocrite. What I think is that you convinced me to give up my career so you could have complete control. What I think is that you've been systematically destroying my self-esteem for years to justify your own choices." He tried to deny it, to explain it away, to make it about anything other than what it was. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about her unearned position, about the work she was failing to do while drawing a salary meant for someone qualified. I was thinking about justice. The next morning, I went to work with a new sense of purpose. I requested Olive's files, all of her projects, all of her performance reviews. What I found was even worse than I'd expected. She'd been assigned to 3 major client projects in the past 6 months. All 3 had significant problems: missed deadlines, budget overruns, client complaints. Her work was sloppy, her analysis superficial, her recommendations generic and unhelpful. But somehow she'd received glowing performance reviews from her previous supervisor, who had conveniently left the company just before I arrived. Reviews that praised her innovative thinking and strong client relationships, despite clear evidence to the contrary. I called into my office that afternoon. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 28, with perfectly styled hair and an expensive handbag. She walked in with confidence, like she owned the place. "I wanted to meet with you to discuss your current projects," I said, gesturing for her to sit down. "Of course," she said, settling into her chair. "I'm so excited to work with you. Benjamin has told me so much about you." The casual mention of my husband's name, the familiar way she said it, made my stomach clench. "Has he?" "Oh yes, he's always talking about his family, such a devoted husband and father." I wanted to laugh or scream or both. Instead, I opened her file. "Let's talk about the Henderson project. Can you walk me through your strategic recommendations?" For the next 30 minutes, I watched fumble through explanations of work she clearly didn't understand. She used buzzwords without meaning, referenced analyses she hadn't done, and made claims about client needs that were directly contradicted by the client's own statements. I said when she finished, "I'm going to be direct with you. This work is not meeting our standards. The Henderson project alone has cost us significant client confidence, and I'm seeing similar issues across all your assignments." Her confidence faltered. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. My previous reviews were excellent. I was told I was doing exceptional work." "Your previous reviews were based on incomplete information. I've spoken with the clients directly, and I've reviewed the actual outcomes of your projects. We need to see immediate improvement, or we'll need to consider other options." She left my office looking shaken, and I felt a grim satisfaction. Not because I enjoyed making someone uncomfortable, but because finally, someone was being held accountable for their actual performance instead of their personal connections. But I wasn't done. Over the next 2 weeks, I conducted a comprehensive review of the Strategic Development Department. I interviewed clients, reviewed project outcomes, analyzed budget allocations. What I found was a pattern of poor decision-making, inflated performance reviews, and questionable hearing practices. And at the center of it all was Benjamin's influence. He'd been using his position and reputation to interfere with departmental decisions, to advocate for unqualified candidates, to shield poor performers from consequences. I documented everything, every email, every meeting, every decision that couldn't be justified by merit alone. I built a case that was thorough, objective, and damning. 3 weeks after I'd started, I requested a meeting with the CEO and the head of HR. I've completed my initial assessment of the Strategic Development Department, I said, laying out my findings. I've identified several significant issues that need immediate attention. I presented my analysis methodically, professionally. I showed them the client feedback, the project outcomes, the budget impacts. I demonstrated how poor performance had damaged client relationships and cost the company money. Most concerning, I said, is the pattern of decisions that appear to have been influenced by factors other than merit. I believe we have a serious governance issue that needs to be addressed. The CEO leaned forward. What kind of governance issue? The kind that could expose the company to significant liability if not handled properly. I recommend a formal internal investigation to determine the full scope of the problem. They authorized the investigation immediately. Within days, a team of external consultants was reviewing hearing practices, performance evaluations, and decision-making processes in the Strategic Development Department. The investigation took 2 weeks. 2 weeks during which Benjamin became increasingly agitated, increasingly desperate. He tried to talk to me about it, to find out what I knew, to convince me to be reasonable. "You're destroying people's careers over nothing," he said one evening after Christian had gone to bed. "Is just learning, she needs time to develop. She needs to be qualified for the job she was hired to do," I replied. "She needs to earn her position through merit, not through personal relationships." "What are you trying to prove here? That you're tougher than everyone else, that you can come in and clean house?" "I'm trying to prove that competence matters, that integrity matters, that people should be judged on their abilities, not on who they're sleeping with." He flinched at that, and I knew I'd hit the mark. The investigation concluded on a Friday. The results were presented to the executive team on Monday morning. By Tuesday, both and Benjamin had been terminated. Was fired for poor performance and misrepresentation of her qualifications. Benjamin was fired for abuse of power, conflicts of interest, and creating a hostile work environment through his interference in departmental decisions. I wasn't supposed to know the details, but told me later that the investigation had uncovered not just the affair, but evidence of Benjamin using company resources for personal purposes, pressuring subordinates to give favorable reviews to his mistress, and creating a toxic culture of favoritism and unprofessionalism. "It was worse than anyone realized," said. "They found emails, hotel receipts charged to the company, even evidence that he'd threatened people who questions performance." When Benjamin came home that Tuesday evening, he was a broken man. Gone was the confident, successful executive who'd spent 8 years telling me I wasn't ambitious enough. In his place was someone deflated, desperate, scrambling to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. "They fired me," he said, slumping into a kitchen chair. "They fucking fired me." "I know," I said quietly. I was making dinner spaghetti, Christian's favorite. Normal life continuing despite the earthquake that had just shaken our world. "Did you know this would happen when you took that job? Did you know?" I turned to face him. I knew that if I did my job well, if I evaluated things objectively, if I held people accountable for their performance, the truth would come out. I knew that if someone wasn't qualified for their position, that would become apparent. I knew that if someone was abusing their power, that would be exposed. "You destroyed my career, you destroyed my life." "No, Benjamin, you destroyed your own career, you destroyed your own life. I just refused to help you cover it up." He looked at me with such hatred then, such pure rage, that I actually took a step back. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've won something here." "I think I've remembered who I am. I think I've remembered what I'm capable of. I think I've remembered that I am ambitious enough, driven enough, qualified enough to succeed in the world you told me I couldn't handle." "And what about us? What about our marriage? What about Christian?" It was a fair question, one I'd been wrestling with for weeks. "I don't know, Benjamin, I honestly don't know." But I did know. I'd known since the moment told me about the affair. I'd known since I'd seen files and realized how long this had been going on. I'd known since I'd understood that Benjamin's criticism of me, his systematic destruction of my self-esteem, had been designed to make me compliant, to make me grateful for scraps, to make me believe I deserved nothing better. The divorce papers were filed 2 weeks later. Benjamin tried to fight it, tried to argue that I was being vindictive, that I was destroying our family over a misunderstanding. But the evidence was overwhelming. The affair, the abuse of power, the years of psychological manipulation, it all came out in the proceedings. It turned out had already moved on. The moment Benjamin lost his job, lost his status, lost his ability to advance her career, she disappeared. She'd taken a position at another company, apparently with the help of yet another married executive who'd been charmed by her particular skill set. "She won't even return my calls," Benjamin told me during one of our custody discussions. He looked haggard, older, like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. I thought she loved me. She loved what you could do for her, I said, just like you loved what I could do for you until I stopped being useful. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I got primary custody of Christian, the house, and half of our assets. Benjamin got weekends with his son and a harsh lesson in the consequences of his choices. But the real victory wasn't legal or financial. The real victory was what happened at work. In my first year as head of strategic development, I rebuilt the department from the ground up. I hired qualified people based on merit. I implemented transparent evaluation processes. I rebuilt client relationships that had been damaged by poor performance and unprofessional behavior. Our department's revenue increased by 30%. Client satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. We won 3 major industry awards for innovation and strategic thinking. And I did it all while being a single mother, while navigating a difficult divorce, while rebuilding my sense of self after years of being told I wasn't enough.